He wakes before dawn, spade in hand, to tend the row of seeds he buried just days ago. He pours water over the dark earth and watches droplets sink in, hope pulsing in his veins. But by midday, the tender sprouts curl inward, leaves shriveled like discarded paper. He kneels beside them, fingers brushing brittle stems, and feels the first sting of failure. A week later, he pins his last savings on a fledgling startup, convinced this time he's cracked the code. He watches the ticker, heart thumping, as share prices climb, then plummet. The numbers bleed red. He calls the founders for reassurance, but their voices are distant. Markets shift, they say. His bank balance echoes with the same lesson. Life demands more than faith. He turns to love next, desperate for something living that won't betray him. He invites her into his apartment, makes coffee just the way she likes, shares dreams and half-whispered promises. For a moment, she mirrors his excitement. Yet, when he reaches for her hand, she hesitates. "I need space," she says softly, and leaves behind only the echo of her scent. Alone now, he stands at his windowsill, staring at wilted pots, an empty brokerage statement, and the phone screen that still glows with her goodbye. The city hums around him, relentless, indifferent. He feels the weight of every closed door, every dried leaf, every lost dollar. It's as though the world itself has turned against him, trimming his ambitions down to stubs. Still, dawn will come again. He breathes in the chill morning air, spade at his feet. If life insists on testing him, he'll show up again, because sometimes resilience looks a lot like stubborn hope. Human existence, for Carl Jung, hinges on a primordial choice. Confront the terrifying depth of the unconscious or flee into spiritual stagnation. Both paths entail suffering, but their nature and outcomes diverge radically. Theologian Rudolf Otto defined the core religious experience as encountering the numinous, mysterium tremendum et fascinans, the mystery that both repels and attracts. This evokes tremendum, awe, dread, overwhelming power, majesty, absolute unapproachability. Fascinans, awe-filled attraction, captivating mystery, profound fascination. Jung observed that the deepest layer of the unconscious psyche, the collective unconscious, and its central archetype, the self, evokes identical feelings, overwhelming power, mystery, terror, and fascination. The self is experienced as numinous. This is the fear of God, not terror of the divine punishment, but awe before the numinous. It's not about being scared of hellfire or divine retribution, but a deep, respectful trembling before the immense, incomprehensible power and mystery of existence. The universe, or the ultimate ground of being, often called God in this context, it's the feeling of being utterly small before something infinitely vast and mysterious. It demands a descent into the abyss of the psyche, where the ego confronts the self, Jung's archetypes of wholeness. Ego, the conscious part of the personality responsible for identity, decision-making, and navigating daily reality. It likes order, control, and positive self-image. Self, the central archetype representing the total, integrated personality, both conscious and unconscious. It's the potential for wholeness, the blueprint of the complete individual. It encompasses both the light and dark aspects we acknowledge as those we repress. Confrontation. The ego, with its limited perspective and defenses, comes face to face with the vastness and complexity of the self. This is shocking and destabilizing for the ego, as it shatters its illusion of control and completeness. This isn't a pleasant stroll, but a challenging, often terrifying, inward journey. It involves deliberately facing the deepest, darkest, most repressed, and unconscious aspects of oneself. The abyss, or shadow, in Jungian terms. It's a confrontation with everything the conscious ego has denied, ignored, or feared. The abyss, one confronts on the psychological path, is this numinous reality. It's experienced internally as the overwhelming power and mystery of the self, and externally, transcendentally, as God. The confrontation is fundamentally with the numinous, regardless of the label. Descending into the abyss of the psyche is encountering a reality that dwarfs the ego. Facing the totality of the self shatters the ego's illusions of control and centrality, inducing exactly this awe-filled dread, the fear of God, understood as profound humility before the ultimate. Here, God is complexio oppositorum, a union of opposites that shatters our comfortable illusions. It is not either good or evil, loving or wrathful, creating or destroying. It encompasses and reconciles all opposites simultaneously. Our egos prefer simplicity, duality, and comfortable certainties. The self, the archetype of wholeness, is precisely this complexio oppositorum within the psyche. It integrates conscious and unconscious persona and shadow, masculine and feminine, light and dark. Wholeness means embracing all aspects, not just the nice ones. Encountering God and self as the union of opposites forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that reality contains inherent contradictions. Our neat categories and comforting illusions about ourselves and the world are shattered. Illusions shattered include the ego's sense of being in complete control, the idea that we are only our good or conscious parts, belief in a simple, predictable, benevolent universe, denial of our own capacity for darkness, destructiveness, or unacceptable thoughts and feelings. The path of confrontation forces the ego to face this terrifying union of opposites within the psyche. The psychological experience is the experiential equivalent of the confronting the complexio oppositorum nature of God. To confront the self is to confront the divine image within, which reflects the transcendent reality. Integrating the shadow is participating in the divine wholeness. The biblical figure Job is a powerful archetype of the innocent sufferer. He loses everything: wealth, health, family, social standing, despite his righteousness. His story embodies the inexplicable, seemingly unjust suffering that shakes one's foundations. On the path of confrontation, the trials are primarily internal and psychological, though they often manifest in external crises. These trials feel unbearable because they force us to confront our deepest fears, vulnerabilities, repressed traumas, and the apparent meaninglessness of suffering. Job doesn't encounter a simple, comforting God. He encounters the whirlwind, a terrifying manifestation of divine power and mystery that utterly shatters his previous understanding of justice and God. He is confronted with the vast, incomprehensible, awe-inspiring, and terrifying complexity of creation and the divine nature, which includes both beauty and destructive power. This experience reduces him to silence and awe. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself, and repent in dust and ashes. Job's confrontation is the path of confrontation. His fear of God is the awe and terror before the numinous whirlwind, which parallels the psychological descent into the abyss to confront the terrifying totality of the self. Job's transformation comes from integrating this shattering experience of the numinous. Like Job, we face unbearable trials, not because God is cruel, but because wholeness requires integrating all that we fear in ourselves. The suffering is acute, initiatory, and transformative. The suffering inherent in this path isn't punishment from a sadistic deity. It's an intrinsic part of the transformative process. The core purpose of this path of confrontation, wholeness, isn't achieved by being only good or light. It demands acknowledging, accepting, and consciously integrating the shadow, the feared, denied, dark aspects of ourselves, our anger, selfishness, destructive impulses, vulnerabilities, weaknesses, unacceptable desires, and even our capacity for evil. True transformation requires looking directly at what we most want to avoid within ourselves. This is the essence of the confrontation. The suffering is intense, sharp, and deeply felt. It's not mild discomfort. It's often experienced as psychological agony, despair, or profound disorientation. The suffering functions as an initial rite. Ancient rites of passage often involved symbolic death, ordeals, and suffering to mark the transition from one state of being to another. This psychological confrontation is a modern, internalized initiation into a deeper level of consciousness and being. This is the crucial outcome. The acute, initiatory suffering is not pointless. It has the power to fundamentally change the individual. Ego relativization. The ego is dethroned as the absolute ruler, but not destroyed. It learns to serve the larger self. Shadow integration. Repressed aspects are brought to light and their energy made available consciously. Increased wholeness. The personality becomes more complete, authentic, and less fragmented. Greater consciousness. Awareness expands beyond the ego's limited perspective. Resilience in depth. Surviving the abyss fosters profound inner strength and wisdom. Transcendence of opposites. A capacity to hold paradox and see beyond rigid dualities begins to emerge. In essence, the path of confrontation describes the psychological process of facing the numinous reality within. The fear of God describes the experiential quality of encountering the numinous reality beyond. Jung argues that these are two perspectives of the same fundamental experience. The numinous power encountered within the depth of the psyche is the human experience of the divine. Confronting the totality of oneself is confronting the image of God within, which reflects the overwhelming nature of God itself. The self is a central archetype within the collective unconscious. It represents the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, light and dark, individual and transpersonal. It's the archetype of wholeness, order, and the divine within. It's experienced as God, or the image of God, but Jung does not claim the self as God in an objective metaphysical sense. Jung argued that humans can only experience the divine through the lens of the psyche. We have no direct access to ultimate reality outside of our psychological structures. The self archetype is the primary psychic organ through which the experience of God is mediated and shaped. When someone has a profound experience of God, Jung would say the self-archetype has been constellated within them. Therefore, the arduous, terrifying descent into the abyss of the psyche is the experiential pathway to encountering the divine in its awe-inspiring, complex, and transformative power. It is walking the path of true fear of God. The link isn't doctrinal, it's experiential and archetypal. It's based on the observation that the human encounter with the ultimate ground of being and the ultimate ground of the psyche evoke the same profound awe, terror, demand for integration, and potential for transformation. The path of confrontation is a psychological manifestation of the ancient spiritual path defined by the fear of the Lord. In summary, the path of confrontation describes a harrowing yet essential spiritual and psychological journey, driven by awe before the ultimate mystery. One descends into the depth of the unconscious. Here, the small, conscious ego is overwhelmed by an encounter with the total self, experienced as a God who shatters comfortable illusions by embodying the terrifying union of all opposites. This confrontation manifests as intense, Job-like suffering. Crucially, the suffering is not divine punishment, but the necessary ordeal required to integrate the disowned, feared parts of oneself. While acutely painful and initiatory, this process is ultimately transformative, leading to a profound state of greater wholeness, consciousness, and resilience, the birth of the integrated self. It's the path through the darkest valley to reach a more authentic and complete state of being. Faust, a brilliant but dissatisfied scholar, makes a pact with Mephistopheles for ultimate knowledge, pleasure, and worldly experience. He gains immense power and experiences everything the world seemingly has to offer, achieves all the external goals, power, wealth, sensual experience, fame, knowledge. The devastating cost: Faust becomes increasingly isolated, disconnected from genuine love, corrupted by power, and ultimately faces damnation. He possesses the world but loses his humanity, integrity, and connection to true meaning. He embodies the hollow despair. Selling your soul to the devil symbolizes the refusal of this descent. We trade inner truth for outer validation, power, wealth, or the illusions of control. The suffering here is chronic, a hollow despair, a life devoid of meaning. Like Faust, we gain the world but lose our soul. This isn't about a literal transaction with a supernatural entity. It represents a profound existential bargain. The soul symbolizes our deepest authentic self, inner truth, integrity, core values, connection to meaning, and spiritual essence. The devil symbolizes temptation towards external, ego-driven, often materialistic or controlling desires. The Faustian bargain is an escape hatch from this difficult inner work. Instead of bravely descending into the unknown depth of the self, we choose a seemingly easier path, pursuing external validation and rewards. We sacrifice our authenticity, integrity, and connection to our deeper self, in exchange for those external markers of success, approval, or a sense of security. We become defined by what we have or appear to be rather than who we are. Chronic suffering. This isn't acute, dramatic pain. It's a persistent, low-grade, gnawing dissatisfaction that becomes the background noise of existence. It doesn't go away with more success or possessions. Hollow despair. A deep sense of emptiness, futility, and pointlessness. Despite external achievements, there is an inner void. Achievements feel meaningless because they aren't connected to an authentic self. The victory is hollow. Life devoid of meaning. The ultimate consequence, meaning arises from connection to our true selves, to others authentically, to a sense of purpose aligned with our values, or to something transcendent. When we sacrifice our soul for externals, we serve these vital connections. Life becomes a series of actions without deeper significance, leading to existential dread. In summary, instead of confronting our vulnerabilities and seeking meaning from within, we chase external validations through power, wealth, and the false promise of total control. This bargain might grant worldly success, but the cost is catastrophic: chronic, hollow despair and a profound loss of meaning. Like Faust, we might gain the world in a material sense, but we lose the very essence that makes life feel truly valuable and connected. It's a warning against mistaking external achievements for internal fulfillment. God as the unconscious wholeness. Jung's Yahweh, in answer to Job, is not omnipotent but unconscious, a God wrestling with his own shadow. Human suffering is often collateral in God's journey toward consciousness through us. Holy dread is not submission to a tyrant but surrender to a process larger than the ego. In his book Answer to Job, Jung argues the biblical Yahweh isn't a perfected, all-knowing deity. Instead, he embodies the collective unconscious, a primal force containing both light and dark, creation and destruction, yet unaware of his own contradictions. Yahweh acts unpredictably. Jung sees this as God confronting his unreconciled darkness through humans. Our pain becomes the arena where God's unconscious conflicts play out. As Job suffers, Yahweh is forced to confront his own nature. We must surrender to wholeness, accepting that life's chaos and darkness isn't punishment but part of the universal process of unconscious unfolding. For example, Job's suffering forces Yahweh to appear in the whirlwind, a symbol of God confronting his shadow. Job's agony becomes the catalyst for divine self-awareness. Fear of God anchors us in awe, not resentment. Job's dread allowed him to demand answers from the whirlwind without collapsing into bitterness. His suffering continued, but his agony became revelation. The alchemy of fear reveals that sacred fear, anchored in awe, not punishment, frees us to confront the truth rather than collapse into resentment. In Job's story, holy dread empowers him to argue his case to God, transforming suffering from a punitive mystery into a crucible for revelation. Toxic fear drains us with blame, but sacred fear redirects our gaze inward, shifting the question from, "Why is this happening to me?" to, "What is this revealing through me?" Though this shift, victimhood evolves into sovereignty, as suffering becomes a mirror for unconscious growth. Much like a garden withering in drought, the external circumstances may remain unchanged, but instead of railing at the sky, we inquire, does this barren season reflect an inner dryness, and what must wither within for new life to bloom? Yahweh isn't static perfection, but an archetype evolving through human consciousness. Our struggles are his struggles. Pain isn't random, it's an initiation into deeper layers of the self. True power lies in engaging the mystery, not denying it. Man's suffering is God's suffering. Man's growth is God's awakening. Jung's core message in answer to Job. This reframes suffering not as divine punishment, but as participation in the cosmos becoming conscious of itself. Your withering garden becomes a symbol inviting you into holy dialogue with the depths. Thriving begins where the ego's interpretations die. Stop reviving dead plants. Start deciphering their whispers. By confronting the unconscious, you dissolve the ego's interpretive filters. A withered garden is no longer the proof of your worthlessness, but a symbolic mirror reflecting inner states. For example, a failed project isn't "I am a fraud," but "What false self was I performing? What authentic skill did I neglect?" The ego's unraveling often begins as a nightmare. Failure triggers shame and identity collapse. Loss evokes grief and emptiness, and decay breeds panic and self-blame. Yet through the transformative lens of the self, each breakdown becomes a breakthrough. Failure initiates a sacred threshold, asking what outdated version of self must die for wholeness to emerge. Loss liberates us from false attachments, prompting reflection on the chain it broke, and decay invites symbolic inquiry into what passions had been starved, and what neglected roots need uprooting. The key insight remains: though the ego fears death, the self understands that dissolution is not destruction, it is the doorway to rebirth. Thriving in the self isn't about avoiding pain, it's about developing an unshakable inner posture within it. Calm in catastrophe, not numbness, but a deeper center stillness. You witness chaos without becoming it, like a tree rooted in bedrock during a storm. Humor in despair, the ability to laugh at the absurdity of suffering, not to deny it, but to disarm its tyranny. Job smiles wryly at Satan's theatrics. Awe in the ruins, seeing decay as part of a larger cycle of death and rebirth, a cathedral of meaning in collapsed plans, a fallen redwood nourishing 1,000 saplings. The most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm. They are like thunderstorms which clear the atmosphere. How do you cultivate the self-thriving? When failure strikes, ask, what initiation is this? Is it calling you to shed perfectionism, reclaim a forsaken dream? When loss devastates, ask, what false self did I bury with this? A job title? A relationship that hid your loneliness? When decay appears, ask, what part of me needs composting? Outdated beliefs? Untended creativity? The blooming, thriving in the self is not happiness without shadows. It is rootedness when the world quakes. Curiosity in the face of pain. Awe before the terrifying beautiful mystery of your own depth. The ego's garden dies, the self-wilderness blooms. As poet Rolk whispered, do you not sense that all that dies longs to be pressed deep into your heart? It is your depth that holds the seeds of resurrection. This is Jung's ultimate gift. Your suffering is the soil where your sovereignty takes root. Water it with holy dread, and it flowers beyond the storm. When you resist the abyss, the universe conspires in symbols. Synchronicity is a term coined by Jung to describe meaningful coincidences that lack a causal relationship but feel profoundly interconnected. Unlike random chance, synchronicity implies an underlying pattern or message from the unconscious mind, often surfacing when we're at a psychological crossroads. Jung called it an acausal connecting principle. Events linked by meaning, not cause and effect. The coincidence carries personal significance. The events aren't physically related. Reflects a dialogue between your inner state and outer world. In daily life, we often encounter coincidences that seem trivial at first glance, but sometimes a pattern emerges, something more layered, rich with emotional resonance and symbolic meaning. This is the realm of synchronicity, where the outer world mirrors the inner psyche in subtle yet profound ways. Thinking of a song, you casually think of a tune, and later it drifts onto the radio, an everyday coincidence. But in the realm of synchronicity, the experience deepens. You dream of the same song, then hear it in a cafe, stumble upon its lyrics in a book, and a stranger hums it beside you, all while grappling with a life decision intricately tied to the song's meaning. Encountering an animal. Spotting a pigeon on your commute is mundane and expected, but imagine a rare hawk soaring above during a personal crisis, echoing a dream you once had about breaking free. Later, a feather from the same bird lies in your path. Coincidence? Or a symbolic message resonating from within? Meeting someone. Bumping into an old acquaintance in a busy market feels random. Yet, what if the same unfamiliar stranger keeps appearing at the airport, a bookstore, a mountain trail, just days after you dreamt of finding a mentor? That repeated meaning feels like the universe gently nudging your attention towards something significant. Objects breaking. A phone charger fraying from everyday use is expected wear and tear. But what if your wedding ring cracks on the exact anniversary of a painful divorce, right as you're reading a poem about release? The timing, the symbolism, the emotional weight, the structure becomes more than physical. It becomes a metaphor. We often mistake strange events for flukes, blips, and probability too rare to mean anything. But synchronicity doesn't play by the rules of statistics. Its power lies not in numbers, but in meaning. There is subjective meaning in synchronicities that defies probability. Probability deals in odds. A 1 in 10,000 chance is mathematically possible yet emotionally hollow. But what happens when that rare occurrence perfectly mirrors your internal chaos? You dream of a tsunami. The next day, while feeling overwhelmed by a flood of responsibilities, you accidentally spill water over a map of Japan. It's not the event itself, it's the emotional echo that makes it feel profound. No probability model can weigh that kind of resonance. Also, in synchronicity, there is patterns, not just random events. Randomness is isolated, like flipping heads once on a coin toss. Synchronicity forms clusters, failed projects, withered plants, missed flights, all in one turbulent week, while you're dodging an overdue career change. The symbols pile up, whispering a message you're reluctant to hear. These aren't disconnected incidents, they are psychological breadcrumbs. Synchronicity tends to erupt in unstable soil during divorce, career shifts, spiritual disorientation, or emotional repression. A woman ignoring her artistic calling dreams of a blank canvas. Days later, she starts seeing paint splatters everywhere. Graffiti, spilled coffee, film scenes, each a vibrant nudge towards self-expression. It's not hallucination, it's a dialogue between her soul and her waking life. When the ego resists the descent, the unconscious speaks through synchronicity. Jung's acausal connecting principle, meaningful coincidences, example, recurring dreams, failed projects, dying plants, rupture ordinary reality, exposing the ego's futility. A call to the abyss. Your dying garden or bankrupt investments are not random misfortunes. They are symbolic gestures from the self, sabotaging ego attachments to force you inward. The universe whispers, your outer life is a dead end. Turn toward the depth. The choice. Heed these signs, and synchronicities become guides. Ignore them and they escalate into crisis, a divine intervention to save the soul from spiritual death. Here we can ask, why some people can sell their soul to the devil, while others are called over and over again to face the abyss. The difference between those who sell their soul and those who are forcibly called to face the abyss hinges on several interconnected factors related to the ego strength, consciousness, psychological defenses, and the intensity of unconscious pressure. Individuals with relatively healthy and adaptable ego structure are more capable of voluntarily undertaking the descent. They can tolerate uncertainty, face uncomfortable truths, and integrate shadow aspects without completely fragmenting. They might sense the need for change and initiate inner work without needing catastrophic prompts. Fragile ego may instinctively avoid the descent out of terror, that facing the unconscious will overwhelm and destroy their sense of self. Selling their soul becomes a desperate defense mechanism to hold the self together, even if it creates hollowness. Rigid ego creates the prime condition for being called to the abyss. This ego is heavily armored, inflated, or identified with its persona. It actively resists any threat to its self-image or control. Because it refuses the voluntary descent so vehemently, the unconscious has no other choice but to speak louder and more disruptively. Hence, synchronicity and other ruptures. Some individuals are simply not attuned to their inner world. They may be deeply identified with external roles, material success, or societal expectations. The need for a descent isn't perceived. The soul is a foreign concept. Outer validation feels like genuine success. They are prime candidates for the Faustian bargain, without recognizing the trade-off. Individuals with emerging consciousness and awareness are the group most likely to be called. They might have an intellectual understanding or a flicker of awareness that something is missing, but their ego actively resists the implications. They try to rationalize, distract, or double down on control. Because there is some dawning awareness combined with strong resistance, the unconscious amplifies the signals to break through the ego's defenses. Some individuals may have unconscious material that, while present, doesn't exert overwhelming pressure. They might navigate life with minor neurosis or compromises without needing a major rupture or being tempted by a grand bargain. Others harbor powerful, neglected aspects of the self. This creates immense internal pressure. If consciously ignored or actively suppressed, this pressure builds until it erupts. Synchronicities are one form of eruption, the unconscious creating meaningful connections in the external world to force attention inward. Failed projects and dying plants become objective correlatives, external manifestations of the inner state of neglect, stagnation, or resistance. They are not just bad luck, they are symbolic messages revealing the ego's futility in maintaining its illusions of control while the inner truth decays. In essence, selling the soul is often the path of the unaware or the fragile ego seeking stability in externals, or the rigid ego actively choosing to double down on control and validation to avoid the terrifying unknown of the unconscious. The suffering is chronic but often numbed. Being called to the abyss is often the fate of the individual with some dawning awareness but a rigid ego structure that fiercely resists the necessary inner work. Because the resistance is so strong, the self-regulating psyche escalates its tactics, using synchronicities and symbolic failures as a wake-up call. The suffering here is often more acute and disruptive, forcing a crisis that demands attention. It's not necessary that one group is better than the other. The calling can be intensely painful and disruptive. However, in Jungian terms, it represents an opportunity, however forced, for greater wholeness and integration that the path of pure avoidance ultimately denies. The synchronicity is the psyche's attempt to save itself from complete disassociation, even if the ego experiences it as an attack. These are not exercises, they are rituals to marry insight to instinct. Rotate them like seasons, let each wound the ego's illusion of control. I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. Thriving begins when we trade the devil's false comforts for the terror and tenderness of the unfolding self. Beyond the core Jungian practices like active imagination, dream analyses, and reflective journaling, here are 4 potent methods to deepen the confrontation with the unconscious and accelerate integration, each honoring Jung's principle that transformation requires engaging the psyche through multiple channels. Nature as mirror. The unconscious is the living world. Sit spot practice. Visit the same natural site daily. Record external events. Internal states. Patterns reveal eco-synchronicities, where outer ecology mirrors inner. Symbolic gardening. Plant species reflecting your psyche. Tend them as living active imagination. A dying rose becomes, where does my love need compost to rebirth? Jung's insight. Nature is psyche's most immediate expression. Your dying vegetables weren't failure, they were the self screaming in chlorophyll. Ritual sacrifice, turning ideas into bone knowledge. Name your devil bargain. Write what we've traded for comfort. Perhaps you've sold your creativity for security. Create a votive object. Shape it from clay or ash. Burn or bury it. Speak aloud, I reclaim what was pawned. The effect of this, ritual embeds insight in the limbic brain. Neuroscience confirms physical acts deepen neural commitment beyond journaling. Creative arts, let the shadow hold the brush. Automatic drawing and painting, let the hand move freely before analysis. A banker avoiding his abyss drew black vortexes for weeks, then painted a gold child within it, unlocking paternal grief. Shadow dialogues via puppetry. Craft a figure for your repressed self. Argue with it as your inflated ego. Record the debate. Jung's method. When logic fails, art forces the irrational to manifest. The image is the diagnosis. Sacred study. Dialoguing with the dead. Depth reading. Choose text attacking your defenses. For example, answer to Job for resentment. Read book for spiritual bypassing. Write marginalia as your shadow. Your devil self scribbles in red. Job deserves worse. Your holy dread responds. Yahweh's cruelty is his suffering. Do you see? The goal. Turn reading into active confrontation with tradition, where the page becomes a transferential field to your complexes. Threading practices into presence begins with choosing the right portals for engagement and rotating them. Embodied rituals help prevent somatic disassociation and guard against intellectualizing the shadow by anchoring awareness in the body's truth. Nature mirroring breaks the alienation between self and ecosystem, nudging the psyche away from literalism towards symbolic insight. Creative arts interrupt over-reliance on verbal cognition and reawaken dream work, while sacred study resists spiritual laziness and protects against using Jungian ideas as a bypass. Crucially, to prevent the ego from co-opting these tools, methods must be rotated weekly. If journaling begins to feel safe, it may be time to trade pen for sand and let the unconscious ambush you through metaphor. Presence emerges not from mastery, but from letting each method challenge the places the ego hides. The great catalyst remains refusing comfort. When synchronicities strike, for example, investments fail, ask, what actions does the self demand that my ego fears? Then do it before you understand. This is holy dread in motion. As Jung warned, only the wounded healer heals. These practices wound the ego's illusions of control, so the self may breathe. Your wilting plants, that's the Unus Mundus, whispering. Your soul's draught bends space-time. Wolfgang Pauli, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, and Carl Jung collaborated on the concept of synchronicity, exploring the connection between the physical and the psychological realms. Their work, primarily between 1946 and 1954, investigated how seemingly coincidental events might be meaningfully related, challenging traditional notions of causality. Jung and Pauli's visions of reality as a unified field, Unus Mundus, reveals your grief, fear, or longing warp probability itself, where psyche and matter are complementary aspects of one substance. Meaning is the hidden force that collapses possibilities into events, like gravity warping spacetime. The psyche is the inside of matter, and matter is the outside of the psyche. The mechanics of influence unfold through a subtle psychic choreography. When intense emotion stir within you, grief, fear, longing, it activates archetypal energy, such as death and rebirth or shadow. This unconscious charge radiates into your perceptual field, gently warping probability so that symbolically resonant events begin to surface. Dead plants appear. Obituaries cluster in your newsfeed. A documentary on wildfire regeneration catches your eye. You unconsciously filter and amplify these symbols while ignoring countless neutral details, creating what appears to be a synchronicity, a moment where psyche and matter fuse. Whispering, the universe is mirroring your grief. It's not that you caused these events, but that your inner landscape made them statistically inevitable in your awareness. In this way, your emotions don't just shape your reactions, they bend the contours of your reality into meaning-bearing mirrors. Psyche influences matter, but within cosmic laws. No Newtonian violations. Meaning won't levitate you or bend spoons. It works through quantum probability and symbolic resonance, not magic. Archetypal governance. Synchronicities serve wholeness, individuation, not ego desires. You attract meaningful songs, for example, not lottery wins, because the soul craves growth, not comfort. The surrender paradox. Force blocks flow. I demand a sign, and you receive silence. Sacred curiosity opens doors. What is being revealed? Symbols begin to flood in. To collaborate with reality, name your archetype. I am in the shadow archetype, where my repressed rage lives. Track symbols. Log random events, broken keys, stalled cars, mold. Ask alchemical questions. What probability field does this event reveal? What in me summoned this? Then act on the revelation. Reality is not a machine, it is a living conversation. Psyche speaks through biases and meaning cravings. Matter answers through probability collapses and symbols. Synchronicity is their handshake. Proof you are co-creating your story with the universe. In essence, psyche and matter converse through a unified field, where meaning activated by emotional biases and archetypal charges suddenly warps probabilities, making symbolically resonant events statistically inevitable in your perceptual field. You don't control matter like a puppeteer, but your inner state collaborates with the cosmos to collapse quantum potentials into meaning events. A dying plant mirroring neglected creativity, songs echoing your crisis, that serve soul growth, transforming reality from a mechanical script into a sacred dialogue, where rotting vegetables whisper alchemical questions, and attention is the wand turning chaos into revelation. This is the dance. Your inner world weighs the dice, the universe rolls them. Synchronicity is the poetry that emerges proof you are both the dancer and the dance. Do not mistake these words for the descent itself. Jung's theories, Otto's numinous, Job's whirlwind, they are fingers pointing to the moon, but not the moon. To stare at the finger is to remain in the library while your garden withers. The true altar is not the concept, but the courage to kneel in your own ruins and dig. Theories may name the abyss, but only practice transforms it. The spade breaking earth. The journal staining with shadow ink. The breath held as you touch a brittle stem, not as metaphor, but as felt ache in your bones. This is where holy dread becomes flesh. When you trade the comfort of dogma for the raw, unrehearsed dialogue with your dying Basil. Your empty ledger, her ghost in the doorway. The path isn't in the description of the whirlwind, it's in the grit of your knees when you demand answers from your own storm. So let the theories fall like husks. Pick up your spade. Dawn is calling not to the philosophers, but to gardeners of the soul.